the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. You take the red pill, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, 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 take the red. You stay in Wonderland. You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
You're listening to the Red Pill Reality Show with your host, Riscalla, every Saturday night on the LNM Network from 9 p.m. to midnight. And now your host, Riscalla.
All right, here we go. Hello and welcome. It is the Red Pill Reality Show. I am your host, Riscalla. We come to you every Saturday night on here at WCET.FM, late night in the Midlands.com. You can find us on Facebook. You go to the Red Pill Reality Show on Facebook, click on Contact Us. You can listen live that way. Bunch of different ways you can listen to us. Most importantly, listen to us. I'm going to have some special people on tonight. This is something I have pursued, probably 6 shows now, because I feel this is absolutely vital. If for those of us who want the founder, let's try that again, with the boy, I'm having a hard time. Trying to read and talk doesn't work. What the originating founding fathers wanted for us is not what we're living under today. And many people are disgruntled with what they have seen with what we call government. You'd have to be pretty blind not to see that the fiasco that is occurring today in what we call government. I was very disillusioned in February of 2002 when I was looking for something related to 9/11, and I stumbled across, I don't even remember how I did it, but I came across a government website that had documentation about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was what started the Vietnam War, basically. As I'm reading these documents, I have to go back and read them like 3 or 4 times because I can't believe what I'm seeing. I can't believe what I'm reading. What I'm seeing, what I'm discovering is that the war that killed tens of thousands, well, that's what they tell us anyway, almost 60,000 of my generation died in this war. That's what they tell us. No telling what the real number is. God knows how many Vietnamese died, North Vietnamese died in this, as well as South Vietnamese. God knows how many people died over this incident that started this war, to find out that the incident was a lie. And that night, I really thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown because I went back and had to read it over and over. I just couldn't believe what I was reading. I couldn't believe that people could be so evil. But then it began to make sense to me because those friends of mine that were shipped over there and then came back, they told me in detail many things, but one of the things that they told me that really didn't make sense to me was that if the enemy was in the rubber plantations, which there were quite a few over there, and the enemy was shooting at you, you didn't have permission to shoot back. I said, what kind of crazy nonsense is that? We're in a war, for God's sake. I discovered later on that the rubber plantations were owned by a major corporation, and they couldn't suffer the damage to their rubber trees in this particular area. Crazy stuff like that. So the war was never meant to be won. The war was meant to carry on and on and on and on. Does that sound familiar? And they reached a point where they just couldn't do it anymore. They were getting their behinds handed to them right and left. And they got out. But I had such a difficult time when I stumbled across this thing that said that the Gulf of Tonkin incident was basically a manufactured act in order to justify a war. Does that sound familiar to you? I think about Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction. You remember that? The weapons, oh, they're over here, oh no, they're over there, oh no, come on over here. They must have moved them. Let's go take a look over there. In my mind, I see a remembrance of a video of George Bush making fun of it all. They never did find them. And here he is as a dinner banquet, I think is what it was, laughing and joking about, oh, well, they're not under here. Well, let me look over here. Oh, they're not over there. Oh, no, they weren't there. They knew he had them. There was evidence that he had them. There was no question that he had them, because it was them that sold them to him. But he happened to use them on his neighbors in Iran. Hundreds of thousands of people died because of American-made chemical weapons supplied to Saddam Hussein while he was the dictator of Iraq. So our excuse for going into Iraq, which had absolutely no physical threat to our country. Now, I use the word physical because they were a threat to our country. But they had no physical threat to our country, yet we went in there, and to this day, we have created a hellhole. You and I play a responsible portion of that. Whether it was against our will or not, it still occurred in our name. It's still our money that is being used to propagate these wars. So yes, Saddam Hussein was a threat to this country, but it was not a physical threat. It was a financial threat. Saddam Hussein was introducing gold-backed currency. That is a direct threat against the Federal Reserve. Same thing with Muammar Gaddafi. Sound familiar? Do you realize that the government that we have today has jumped around this planet from one country to another, literally overthrowing other governments in the name of, quote, democracy, which were not a democracy to begin with, but that's a whole nother story. This is being done in your name and my name. This is being done with the money that they have taken from us, which they call taxation. It's all being done under deception. Now, for me personally, I'm sick and tired of this. I'm sick and tired of watching a small group of people literally make hundreds of millions of dollars by nothing more than holding a position within our government and using that position to leverage themselves into a multimillionaire status in a very, very, very short period of time and not doing spit to earn a penny of it. That's my opinion anyway. I believe that there's other people out there who feel the same as I do. We are tired of these people who are acting as immature little juveniles, fighting with each other the entire time, not getting anything accomplished, meanwhile making over $170,000 a year, along with the Cadillac of benefits. And the infrastructure in this country is in desperate need of help. The homeless in this country, who are citizens of this country, need desperate help. But it seems as though the eyes of attention are turned upon people who really don't even belong here to begin with. They broke our law to get in here. And now they are to be treated as though they are first-class citizens, and the citizens who have paid into the system are to be treated as trash. Does any of this make any sense to anybody? I had one individual tell me, Riscalla, you don't understand. We have enough money for both. Really? Well, if we have enough money for both, how is it that we can't even take care of one side? Explain that to me. Because I think what you're feeding me is a pile of feces, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of hearing it. I'm tired of the nonsense that these people try to push down our throats. I'm tired of the call to war by some of these people running for what we call president. Openly calling for war on the citizenry of this country by... I got to get a hold of my mouth because I'm actively stating that they are going to come and take our weapons door to door if they have to. That's an open call for civil war in this country. And what is sad is many people sit back and do nothing, say nothing. This man should be taken down and reprimanded. How dare you? Who do you think you are? The very thing that puts you where you are today, our Constitution that you were supposed to defend, you blatantly betray. So the last 5 or 6 shows, I can't even keep track of them anymore, we have been talking about something that happened in this country many, many years ago. And a result of that, it has literally changed the way that our government operates. And the end result is we are living today under a government that was not intended to be. It is for lack of a better description, a farce. In legal terms, I believe it would be considered illegal. Yes, the government that we have is illegal. And they have referred to themselves many times as the de facto government. And that's basically what a de facto government is. A government that is put in place by power, by their own power, not the power of the people. By their own power. As in the barrel of a gun kind of power. I, for one, feel that there are other people out there who, through the conversations that I have, feel that there are other people out there who are thinking along the same lines I am. Something is drastically wrong here. Something is very, very, very wrong. And I will credit this president for exposing the majority of this stuff. I don't think any of this would have been exposed had not this man be president. He's a proverbial gear in the wrenches, if you will. And having said that, we still are under a system that is completely messed up. There is seemingly, in some cases, absolutely no justice whatsoever. And there clearly is a two-standard system. If you have the right last name, you can literally get away with murder. Literally. And God forbid if you are a dark-skinned individual who doesn't have a lot of money, your behind is going up the river without a paddle. Some cases without a canoe. Just drowned you. There is a two-tier system of justice in this country. It was never intended to be that way. Now, what we're going to talk about tonight is something that happened back in the late 1800s. This action that was taken in the late 1800s literally overthrew our government. Now, I've had the fortune of having John Ainsworth on the show 2 times so far. One time for an entire show, another time for just a very brief period. Tonight we're going to have him on again tonight. Again, it's going to be a brief period, but I felt it was important to get him on and to explain, maybe help clarify this government that we're talking about, this government that he has, through probably thousands of hours, at least hundreds of hours of research, has found the documents that shows, that proves without a doubt that something very wrong happened back in the late 1800s. And what that was is our government was overthrown. There was a particular case, and I think it was the Carolinas, one of the Carolinas, North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, where the government was literally thrown out. The government of the people was thrown out, and a military government was put in. A government by the military was put in place. A governor and all of the other required seats for that time were put in place by the military, by force. That's not our country. That's not what our country was founded on. That's what a socialistic, that's what a communistic country would do. And that's exactly what happened. Force their will on the people. And in the process of doing so, continue to erode the people's God-given rights until we are where we are today, where we have people running for office openly and brazenly calling for the confiscation and the disablement of your ability to defend yourself and your family and your loved ones. Openly, brazenly telling us they're coming to get our guns. That doesn't set well with me, and I know it doesn't set well with many, many other people. But put that aside for a moment. The meaning of that statement by someone who's running for the highest office of this country is a meaning, a declaration of war against a citizenry. You have to excuse me. I'm pretty wound up. I'm really, honestly, I'd like to use some words that were more colorful if you get my drift. But I don't think it's very professional. But truly, it is just, to me, I have been talking about this long before I had the honor and the privilege of meeting David, who in turn introduced me to Milo and John, who have turned me on to information in some ways I wish I didn't know, but in other ways I'm so grateful for. The reason why I wish I didn't know is I'm in a quandary. I don't know. I see a way that we may be able to take this to court, but then I'm concerned that the courts that we take it to, the courts are illegal. And these people are corrupt. Every corruption is so far and so deep. I do see that we could do this with the help of the people. I do believe that. That's why I'm devoting all of these shows. I've gotten away from all the political current subjects and devoted this to these shows because this could be the answer that we have been looking for. A way for us to be living with a government that is truly by the people, that is truly for the people. Not a government that has far and above gone beyond its authority. They do not have the authority to force you to do anything. Understand that. It is not within the authority of the government to force its citizenry into anything. What it is required to do, the government, is to defend the Constitution. What the Constitution is a document that is laid out in black and white that when you are a servant of the people, which is what you're supposed to be, this is the document that gives you the guidelines of the rights that the people have been given by God, and that you are to defend that at all costs. When you have an individual openly and brazenly willing to break the oath that they will be taking to defend that, we have a serious problem in this country. You'd have to be blind not to see that we are in desperate ways in this country right now. In some areas, not to be a fearmonger, but in some areas I really think we're on the cusp of a civil war in this country. And if there is any way that we can avoid that, then my God, that's what we got to do. Too many people in this country have not witnessed what war can do. And I promise you, if there was some possible way that imagery could be put into your mind, I guarantee you, I have no doubt in my mind, you'd say the last thing that we want is war. The last thing that we need is more bloodshed. What we need to do is figure out how to make this work. And the way to make it work is there is already a guideline in place that was put there by some very intelligent men, that was taken over, that was overthrown, that was thrown aside by some very evil men. And as long as we are living in a lie, we will never truly be happy. We will never truly have the government that we deserve. You think you deserve the government that we have today? I don't. These people have proven to me that they cannot be trusted. They have proven to me that they will abuse whatever power that they can throw in our face. Now, if that's the kind of government that you want, if that's the kind of future that you want for you and your children and your grandchildren, then just turn this station off. Turn me off. I don't want to talk to you anyway. You're part of the problem. But if you're somebody who is looking for a way, a viable legal way to bring about a change, a positive change, anybody can bring out a change. Look what the last president did. He promised us a change, didn't he? So anybody can bring about a change. I'm talking about a positive change, a change that will positively affect the future of us and our country. If that means anything to you, then stay tuned, because I got some people that are coming on. They have some very important information, vital, that can change the future of our country legally and turn this thing we call a government back around to the way it was intended to be. And that intention is to be for us, not all these freaking corporations, not for their pockets. A little bit of frustration. Sorry. All right, here we go. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back.
You're listening to the Red Pill Reality Show on the LNM Network. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Do you need toner for your Epson, Hewlett-Packard, Canon, Brother, Apple, or Sharp printers? Look no further than Laser Technologies. In business for over 20 years, they offer the lowest prices on toner on the web. They can also repair your laser printers and toners fast and easy. Call their expert staff today at 561-792-9600 or email us at service@laser-technologies.com for all your toner needs. All toner is shipped nationwide. Why wait? Get the lowest prices on toner. Call or email us today.
Grace has some pretty stellar arms, like Serena Williams good, but her face is pretty disgusting.
Someone please tell him to go back into his closet and leave us alone.
Britney's face is so stupid and I hate her so much. It's like a scientist created her in a lab to annoy humanity and didn't even do that good of a job.
Megan reminds me of a troll doll that came to life intent on killing us with her stupidity.
Why is Grace's head so big? It definitely has nothing to do with how smart she is and probably everything to do with how bloated she is.
He's so funny. Just kidding. Who would find this disfigured flamingo funny?
Never post a selfie of yourself. You look so ugly.
The only reason you have so many views is because we think you're a freak and we can't look away.
Megan is the main reason that the world sucks so much.
I would rather get cancer than listen to another Trevor Moran song.
You are a mistake. You should have never been born.
Drown yourself in a shallow puddle, please.
Wow, I hope she's sterile.
These really stopped being funny a long time ago.
You're so much more than the things that people say about you.
Those people have no right to say cruel things to you to make themselves feel better.
It's okay that you sound different than everyone else.
That's what makes you so special.
We will not tolerate it.
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 Every day, people make me feel like I stand out simply because of the way that I look.
Every day, people make me feel small.
Every day, I face the cruel words of bullying.
And every day, people tell me that I'm brave for enduring this humiliation.
But we're not the brave ones.
It's the ones that say no to the bullying.
The witnesses.
If we all join together, there's nothing that we can't do.
We will no longer be the silent majority.
When we see bullying online,
We will let the world know that we're going to take action with the eye.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
Our actions will overpower cruel words.
I am a witness.
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 There's power in words.
But it's nothing compared to the power of the actions that we put behind our words.
Visit eyewitnessbullying.org to learn more.
I am a witness, and so are you.
I'm gonna stand by you.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
We have ignition. Strap in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. You take the red pill, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, 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 take the red. You stay in Wonderland. You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
You're listening to the Red Pill Reality Show with your host, Riscalla, every Saturday night on the LNM Network from 9 p.m. to midnight. And now your host, Riscalla.
All right, we are back. It is the Red Pill Reality Show. I am your host, Riscalla, every Saturday night, 9 p.m. to midnight here on LateNightInTheMidlands.com. If you go to that website, you will also find we have a chat room there. Chat room's free to use. You can go in there and join up with some of the people in there if you have a comment or question. I'm trying to get in the chat room now. It's giving me a hard time. Of course. We are a listener-supported station, and without the listeners, we couldn't do what we do. So each and every one of you, thank you, who have subscribed. To each and every one of you who have donated, thank you. Greatly appreciated. To each and every one of you who volunteer to do the little bit of work that has to be done on the side there. Some of them are in the chat room, being moderators in the chat room. We have others who help produce the shows. It's a team effort, and as a team, we do phenomenal, and I'm grateful for every one of you that do your part. If you're not a subscriber, please consider a subscription. It's a whopping $5. I tell people it's not about the money, but it is, unfortunately, about the money. And I don't ask people to do anything that I wouldn't do. I'm a subscriber. I pay $5. Yes, I pay $5 every month because I believe in this. I believe in what we're doing. I believe in a network like this that takes the time out to bring to you information that's not readily available anywhere. The information that we have covered the last 5 or 6 shows, I don't know where we'd find this kind of information. Documented evidence that something very bad happened to us as a country back in the late 1800s, and has been kind of sort of hidden from us. I know for me, when I found out about it, it was a total shock. I had no idea some of the stuff that was brought to my attention. And I wanted to spread this information. I know that there must be people out there who feel the same as I do. I am extremely frustrated with what I am seeing today. I have friends of mine who have fought and shed blood for this country. We deserve better than what we have today. Far better than what we have today. Even with the president and all the wonderful things that this man has done. The bottom line is what we have in place is not what the founding fathers intended to be. And as a result of that, we've lost out. And all we're asking for is what is rightfully ours. And I believe what is rightfully ours is a better way of doing business when we talk about our government. A government for the people. A government by the people. What we have now is a bunch of crooks, really. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. I can't say each and every one of them, but the majority of them up there are criminals in some way, shape, or form. How many of them up there have become multimillionaires in a short time that they've been up there? They get paid a whopping $170,000 a year, and some of them in 10 years have amassed tens of millions of dollars. You'd have to be blind not to be able to put 2 and 2 together to see that it equals 4. All right, let me welcome John first. This is John Ainsworth. John has a website called americasremedy.com. He also has a video, a DVD, which I happen to get my sticky little fingers on. I've watched it twice. I want to tell you, there's so much information in this video. And it's, I guess in my experience, it's because it's not something that we talk about all the time. But there is so much information in this video. I've watched it twice. I'm going to watch it again to become more familiar with what happened, how these people got away with what they got away with. But the bottom line is, and John's he's going to kind of give us an idea of what happened and describe to us what our government should look like today. What would be the difference if we were under that government that the founding fathers had planned for us? What would be the difference between that and what we're having today? So let me welcome John real quickly, and then I'll bring the other 2 guests on, which is Milo and David. Welcome, John. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Pascal. Good to be back on today.
I really appreciate you taking the time. I know that we kept you up quite a bit I don't want you to stay for the whole show, but I'd like you to stay long enough to kind of describe to us this government that was supposed to be that isn't. But before you get into that, real quickly, let me bring Milo. Welcome, Milo. Thank you for taking the time to call in.
Thank you, Riscalla. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well, my friend. And David, thank you, David. Without you, this wouldn't be happening, my friend. Thank you, David.
Hey, Riscalla. Glad to be here.
Okay, so what I wanted to do is start with John first and just kind of give us an overview. What would be the big difference if we were under the government that the Founding Fathers had intended us to be under? What would be the difference today? I take it from there. I think we would have a president and so forth, but I'm going to let you have it. Go ahead.
Well, thanks for that question. Well, basically the form of government, as far as having a federal government under a constitution, would stay there. The biggest thing that would change would be we have a change of model, for lack of a better term. The fundamental change that happened in post-Civil War America was that during the Reconstruction, they nationalized citizenship. They made everyone a citizen of Congress. So now everyone, Congress gets to dictate what the rights of all individuals are in all the states. So that's the biggest change from what we had when the nation was founded. I think what would make the most amount of sense to people of what we would have would be more like the model that we see in the European Union, where in the European Union, we've got, all the sovereign states. You've got the sovereign state of Germany and Italy and France and Austria and Great Britain, Ireland, Denmark, all these sovereign nations. But they want to treaty with the world. They want to act as a one economic body and treaty with the world through this one entity called the European Union. And we had the Union of States, the Union of Sovereign States. But we see that in this EU model that we see presently, every state retains its sovereignty. France remains being France. Italy remains being Italy. They get to do whatever they want to within their own nations. They make whatever laws they want to make within their own nations. And that's what we would call, originally, under original intent, state rights, the 9th and 10th Amendments. Powers not delegated to the federal government or reserved to the states. And what the Reconstruction Act did was basically nationalize. So think of it this way: if you could think of the European Union and what happened with the Reconstruction Act, if you could think of nationalizing the European Union. In other words, it's not going to be a union of sovereign states. It's going to be a union of one people called, we'll say, just Europeans. They're just going to be Europeans, European citizens, and they're going to be controlled out of Brussels. And Brussels gets to decide what the rights of all the people in Italy are, what all the rights of the people in France are, and the people in Italy have no say anymore. And that's what we've got today is in the United States is this nationalization of citizenship. And I'm just trying to give you an analogy of something we might relate to. So this would just be putting the model back. We're doing a reset button is what we want to do a reset button. It gets the sovereignty back into the states. It gets the federal government, or what we call the national government, to cease being the sovereign entity, or as Federalist Paper number 39 said, the entity that has indefinite supremacy over all persons. It ceases being that, and it becomes more of a limited federal government. It goes back to its limitations. Under the original model, it was virtually impossible to get to where we have this $22 trillion debt. But because of things that have happened and the way they formulated everything, they made it to where debt has become a political issue, to where you use benefits that you're going to give people in order to get votes. This is where which makes it almost impossible to stop this runaway train of debt that we've got going on. So it gets us back in a position where we can be fiscally responsible, morally responsible. We get back as a people of underneath the laws of nature. Nature's God, I think a lot of people like to say, which is fundamentally the Christian morality again, rather than this runaway. I don't even know what to call it anymore.
Rogue, a bunch of criminals.
Rogue, yes.
Theoretically, if we were under that form of government now, and one of the biggest topics right now is immigration. All these people that are coming into this country without our permission, would that give the states more control over that?
Well, there's two parts to the immigration issues. One is the concept that has commonly been titled anchor babies. This concept that if you are born here, you become a citizen. Well, that's an aspect that comes out of Reconstruction also. It used to be that the states decided who were going to be citizens of the states.
Interesting.
The national government regulated what people could come into this country, but then once the people came into the country, the citizens decided the states decided who could become citizens of the states, and that's what made you a citizen of the United States. Was who were citizens of states, and all that's been reversed. Now you're a citizen of the United States, which makes you a citizen of any state in which you might choose to reside, is the phraseology they use.
So
did that answer that?
Well, I think so. We still have a president. We still have a Senate. We still have all that would still be fundamentally the same, correct?
Oh, absolutely. The issue would be all the different departments they have. Department of Education, Department of, I don't even know where to start with anymore. And even the Internal Revenue Service, the issue of being able to tax every individual in their individual capacity in all the states would not exist anymore, because taxation would go back to the states, and the federal government would get most of its revenue from import and export.
From tariffs, yeah. That's how it used to be at one time, I think. If my memory serves me right, that happened up until early 1900s, I think it was. So 1913 or something. Whenever they decided to bring in the Federal Reserve is when the income tax started to come into the picture. Again, an illegal by deception. These are the things that add up in my mind. It's constant deception and illegal moves, giving something, making. I'm trying to figure out the best way to describe it. Giving you some feces, but swearing to you that it's sugar. That kind of thing. You know better. You've had a taste of it, and you go, oh, hell no, I don't want any part of this. But you seem for me, it seems like, what do we do? Well, I didn't know. The only thing I could think of was to try to unite people together and throw all these people out of the existing government and put people in there that were people of integrity, until I found out about what had happened in the late 1800s. And I said, well, that's like pulling out a cancer and just putting in some more stuff that's going to create more cancer. We need to wipe the slate clean, so to speak, a reset, as you referred to, wipe the slate clean and rebuild. And this time when we rebuild, we rebuild according to the way it was supposed to be. I'm really concerned for the future of the people in our country. Those of us who have paid into the system, into this, again, another deceptive system. What is going to be our future when we have this constant small group of people continuously getting away with whatever they want to get away with, while they dole out absolute misjustice to the rest of us? I don't understand how people can continue to put up with that. I do understand now that I have, realized what you guys have come up with and what you've found, that we have a way out, that there is a relief valve, if you will, to release some of this pressure. And that relief valve is, first and foremost, is to acknowledge that something very wrong happened. Secondarily, to understand what happened so that we can rectify the situation. And it is with people like John and David and Milo that we can do things, we can move forward. John is somebody who has done this not only with his mouth, but he's done it with his life. That's somebody that's making a statement. He's not here to tell us, okay, well, this happened and that happened, blah, 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 and continues to live his life, even though he doesn't agree with the system, live his life, so to speak, within the system. He's basically said, no, I'm not going to live within your system. I'm not going to do what your system requires me to do because I don't recognize your system as legal. So he's not somebody who just talks about it. He lives it. So he knows what it's like day in and day out. This isn't an easy decision. This is something that's really weighed heavy on me, finding this out. This is almost as heavy as finding out the Vietnam War was a lie, and my friends that didn't come back died for a lie. That's set very, very wrong with me for up to this day. For many years, I had a difficult time. I couldn't even say what I just said without crying. And now I'm angry. Now I want to figure out a way to fix this, because we can't go on as a country sending our children off to wars and then finding out that the wars are nothing more than for profit and gain of a bunch of just a small group of people who are living off of all of this misery. There has to be a better way. Well, there is a better way. The better way was found a long time ago, and somehow we've gotten off a track. And the way that we were taken off a track was by mischievous, evil ways, wrong, illegal ways to do what they did. And we need to rectify that. So I appreciate you coming on, John. Thank you. I do appreciate you taking the time to explain what happened. I'm going to bring the other two on real quick. I'll have you on for just a few more minutes if you can hang out with me in case the other two have any questions or comments to what you said, and then we'll let you go because I don't want to keep you all night. I know it's really tough on you. But thank you so much. Let me bring David on first. David, thank you for calling in.
Hey, Riscalla. Glad to be here again.
All right. Any comments or questions for John before we go any further?
Well, yeah, I do have a comment, and it comes, he's bringing up a really salient point, and that is that something's seriously wrong about the way that things are supposed to be operating. And
Amen.
It pushed me back to the Federalist Papers and to something that Publius said in number 28. And I think it's important to read this because in the intention of the way things are, it's not working this way anymore. And it's only 5 paragraphs, very short. It says, if the citizens understand their rights and want to defend them, the ability to stop usurpation increases with the increased size of the state. The people in a large community have a natural strength, and that strength is greater than the artificial strength of the government and more able to stop an attempt to establish a tyranny. In a confederacy, the people are the masters of their own fate. Since power is usually the rival of power, the national government will always stand ready to check state usurpations, and the states will be in the same position toward the national government. And that's what we don't have because of what was done in the middle of the 1800s.
In layman's terms, would that mean that the states are all equal before the government's eyes? Would that be fair to say?
Well, they have no power. The states have no power anymore.
I know, but I mean, prior with what you just read, though, would that be? Would that? Am I?
Yeah, they were.
They would all have been equal prior to that.
Let me go on. Whichever side, state or national government, the people's support will be the stronger. If their rights are invaded by either, they can use the other as the instrument of redress. The people will cherish the union, preserving to themselves an advantage that can never be too highly prized. It is an axiom of our political system that the state governments will, in all situations, provide complete security against invasion of liberty by the national authority. Usurpation cannot be hidden by pretenses. The people and the representatives will see them. The legislatures can discover the danger in its infancy. They have civil power and the confidence of the people. They can immediately oppose them using all the resources of the community. The states can unite their forces to protect their liberty. And that is what we don't have. Because we are all national citizens, there is no state authority anymore. Mm. John, would you concur with that?
I believe so. The only reason I believe so is I'm having a little technical difficulty. Everybody's fading in and out on my end, and I'm hearing most of what everyone's saying.
Yeah, you're fading in and out.
Everything what everyone's saying.
I think it's the signal coming to you is fading in and out because when you come in, you fade in and out as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe I agree with everything you said.
Well, yes, it's Madison, so wasn't Madison Publius?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was Madison talking, and he's saying, look, if the people know what's going on, they have the ability to either go to the national government if some of the states are being bad boys, and if this national government is being bad, the states will make sure that the national government gets realigned.
There's no balance.
Yeah, to check and balance.
Yep, there's no balance.
Okay,
right.
Let me bring Milo on. Milo, thank you for taking time to call in.
Not a problem. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having us on again.
Let me give you the same opportunity. Question or comment for John before I let John go?
Oh, John and I talk quite often. I don't know that I've got any questions or comments at the moment, but I can address just for a second what was just read, what David just read to us. And I think the term would be division of powers between the state and the federal government. The original intent was that they would balance each other out.
That's what I felt.
One could act as a check on the other if, like they said, one was misbehaving or acting wrongly or unjustly. So division of powers, I think, is the idea inherent at the root of federalism. and you used the term earlier, a pressure release valve, which is something I think I brought up on the last call we had. The whole idea of federalism is that it can act as a pressure release valve and let the various states be, to use another sort of cliche phrase that we've let go the way of the dodo lately, that the states can act then as laboratories of democracy, that they can try different things, and it's not necessarily going to be imposed upon all of the states. It's just whichever state wants to try some new idea, they might be at liberty to do so, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, and everyone else can learn from their example.
Well, don't we have that to a degree now, though? I think of the cannabis subject, the medical marijuana, or the marijuana subject, as they call it.
That is interesting that you bring that up. Yeah. Technically speaking, look at the way that all went down. Colorado, for instance, and I think maybe Washington State, possibly a couple of others, but I know those two for a fact. I don't follow that issue terribly closely, but I do watch 10th Amendment issues. And what they did was those states acted on their own accord in violation of federal, quote-unquote, federal law, federal statute. We'll call it statute because it's not actually law. It transgresses the Constitution, and therefore technically it's not law for the federal government to even have a drug enforcement agency. That is an unconstitutional division or administrative department of the federal government. Mm-hmm. But anyway, what those states did was to pass, quote, state-level legislation that contradicted, quote, federal law. The federal government had the prerogative to send DEA agents or federal, FBI agents, or even potentially National Guard troops in to quash those state resistance efforts. They chose not to. So John uses a phrase to refer to U.S. citizens as being subjugated with privileges. And I think that's a really astute observation because the federal government revealed right then and there, and I'm going to juxtapose this with something else that's similar but parallel in just a moment, but the outcome was different. So with regard to the cannabis legislation, the federal government made a choice to let those states have their way on that. Those states didn't resist by law. They didn't put up a wall and say, you're not going to enforce your drug enforcement policies in our state. They said, essentially, we're going to take a chance that you might just not think that it's, that the cost-benefit analysis is going to come out on our side. And they happen to be right about that. For now, the federal government's not enforcing anything in those states. It's letting Colorado and Washington make marijuana more or less legal depending on how they want to do it. However, if you back up just a second and take a look at firearms with regard to, well, let me back up even a step further. The federal government is qualified constitutionally to get into the middle of interstate commerce. So one of the other initiatives that a certain organization, I will not name, but which operates on the basis of state sovereignty in the 10th Amendment, when that organization put out sample legislation for a Firearms Freedom Act, there were some states, and I know for one was Kansas, that took that act and passed it through their state house. And the intent of that legislation was ultimately aiming at any firearm that is manufactured within this state and sold within this state and stays within this state, does not cross state lines. The premise is that firearm never enters into interstate commerce, and therefore the federal government has no lawful prerogative to impose any kind of regulations or controls on the manufacture or ownership or other commercial activity related to that firearm. And so long as the firearm stays within the state that it was made in, the federal government can have no interaction with it. Kansas passed an act that basically said that. And I am aware of a situation, and I'll give a little shout out to someone who made me aware of this, J.D. Price, actually, a gentleman from Oklahoma. He's also involved with us to a degree. So thank you, J.D., for bringing this up to me, if you're listening. But he informed me of a particular case in Kansas that came up after Kansas passed that act. And it wasn't related directly to the firearm. It was related to an accessory, a silencer. So a gentleman made a silencer in Kansas. It never left Kansas. He sold it to somebody else in Kansas. That person never took it out of Kansas. It should have been covered by the Firearms Freedom Act that Kansas had passed. Well, it never even left Kansas. Do you think, just take a wild guess and tell me how you think the federal government reacted to that?
Probably not very friendly.
They did not react to it in the same way that they reacted to Washington and
Really?
Colorado's cannabis legalization.
Wow.
They came down on that man, and that man is in prison.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what I expected. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So even though they didn't have a lawful prerogative, because it's a nationalized system, the national government gets to pick and choose what it wants. It's privileges. You can have permission. Colorado as a state can have permission from the federal government to be allowed. They can be given that privilege to legalize cannabis, and that's at the discretion of Congress and or federal agencies. But if you step into any other area of commerce or business of government, any other area of legislation that the federal government or national government doesn't want you as a state or an individual to exercise a right, then your privilege is revoked. Your privilege is no longer allowed. It's that they'll come in and they'll act upon you in whatever way they're able to, legally speaking, prosecution and whatnot. And I guess if it came down to it, if an entire state wanted to do something, if Kansas, for instance, had actually had a militia, and I guess we'll get into this a little more later with David, but if Kansas had actually had an actual militia, not a National Guard, but a militia, and deployed that militia in the defense of this man who was exercising his right under that Kansas legislation, then I suppose it's very possible that it could have ended in the same way, or, could have gone a very similar way to, I don't know, I wasn't around for this, but Kent State, I know a little bit about what happened there just from history, or the Civil War when the states tried to exercise acts of sovereignty and the national government, or at the time it was still technically a federal government, just usurped those powers and came in and said, no, you can't do this. And they sent the army in.
And we don't have that defense now because it was taken under deception again, and in its place was placed the National Guard, and their loyalty would not be to the individual states. So we don't have any defense for the individual states, and in giving that up, whether it was by deception or otherwise, we've also lost the right to defend ourselves. We've lost our sovereignty, and we've lost the right to defend ourselves.
Yeah, I would say not even so much just the right. Perhaps we do still have the right, but, I mean, that's arguable and gets into some legal issues. But the ability, the actual practical ability to, as communities or as states, to stand up and defend ourselves, I really don't know that we have that ability anymore.
That's what I would call the mechanism and the authority. The two of the three legs of the subsidiarity, triangle.
The third, David, being information, right?
Correct.
That's what I thought. Touché.
Well, you've been listening, I suppose.
I try to listen. I mean, I'll be fair. David's taught me quite a bit so far, so I think we've taught you guys, Riscalla, I think John and myself have given you guys a lot of information that y'all were unaware of, and I believe David has brought to the table a lot of great information too, and I just really feel like when we put it all together, it coalesces into a grand solution.
It is a lot of information. The thing about it is the subject that we're talking about, this is not... Here's what's sad about all this. Let me back up a minute. I was having a conversation with some friends tonight, and we were talking about the government, and there are people, many, 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 many people, who can sit down at a table with you and tell you about what a particular sport, whatever it is. It could be anything from golf to bowling to whatever it might be. If they're interested in that, they can give you the stats. If it's a baseball team, the home runs, how many, for years past, some of these people can do this. But you ask them something about our government, they don't know spit. They don't know anything. Now, I realize that part of that is by design, because they don't want us to know. They don't even teach civics anymore in school. It's sad. It's disturbing when we find out about things like that, and then you come across this information, and now you realize why the deception is the deception. Somebody brought up a good point to me. They said that why would the government want to take you after 200 and some odd years of us being here? Why is it lately there's always been a push, but as time has progressed, it is really, really strong to the point where I mentioned earlier in the show, they're in your face, telling you they're going to come take your gun. Why is that? And I said, why? You tell me why. Well, in my opinion, this is what they were saying. In my opinion, the reason that they want to take your guns away because they know that they're doing something you would shoot them for. So more and more people are coming to the conclusion, something's very wrong. We got to make a change. This is what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about a change. We're talking about a vital, a legal change. Milo, I think it was you that I asked, is this an overthrowing of the government? I specifically asked that because I want people who are listening to know we're not looking to overthrow anything. We're looking to right something that is wrong. There's no overthrowing anybody. There's a knowledge of what was intended to be and how it was usurped and taken away. And the knowledge of having that and doing nothing makes you culpable in the knowledge of the deception that is occurring today. I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be part of a deception. I want the truth. I've said many times, it was February of 2002 when I found out about the Vietnam War. It was 9/11 that kept burning inside of me. I had no idea about thermite, none of that stuff, conspiracy theories, none of that. I just saw something that did not set well with me. Something did not look right about the way those buildings came down. And from that point forward, there was this burning fire inside of me to know about as much as I can know. I got to find out more. I knew we weren't being told the truth. That I knew right off the bat. But I didn't know what the truth was. I still to this day, I can't tell you I know what the truth is. I know a heck of a lot more than I did then. But it was that snapped within me that caused this fire to burn inside of me, to know that something is not right. And by golly, I have got to find out everything I can by whatever means I can to know what I can do to rectify it. And in the process of doing that, over the years, I found out so many different things. This is a major part of, I'm telling you, I compare this to that night, Saturday night. It was a little around midnight, sitting in front of my computer and discovering what I discovered and almost having a mental breakdown because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Well, since then, I've become a little more callous to this stuff. Otherwise, if I had discovered this now, after all we've been, I probably would have a nervous breakdown. But I've become a little more callous, I guess is the best way to describe it. And I realize how vital this is. And I compare that to, I think in my mind, how our lives would be different if we were living under the original intent that the Founding Fathers had for us. There would be a balance in place. There is no balance today. We are completely lopsided. How many of you who have listened to me over the years have heard me say this? Everything is upside down, you guys. What is going on? And that is exactly what we're describing here, a government that is upside down. Everything that they do seems to be upside down. There seems to be a group of people that can literally murder people and walk away smiling and patting each other on the back. And there's another group of people that even make the wrong face and they end up behind bars. So we know that there's something wrong. We know that everything is upside down. Now we got to figure out how to rectify it. The very first step is knowledge. That's what these gentlemen are doing tonight. And that's what I am and have a passion for before I met these men, is knowledge and the ability to change people's lives in a positive manner. That's what we're talking about tonight. Changing our lives, changing the way our future is molded in a positive manner. We're not looking at overthrowing anybody. We're looking at making something right that was done wrong. This would be the same as someone coming to your house and deceiving you and taking something from you and you learning about that later. Would it be wrong to come back to that person and say, give me back what is rightfully mine? That's what we're talking about tonight. We're not talking about overthrowing anybody. I want to make that absolutely clear. This is a rectification, if that's a correct word, of something that was done wrong, a rectifying of something that was deceivably done wrong. And all we're asking is give back what is rightfully ours. That's all. Nothing more. Am I right, John?
You're absolutely correct. I mean, I couldn't have stated it really any better than that. I mean, all this is an injury. The federal government injured the states by basically waging war with them and subjugating them and putting them under their control without the people's consent. And if it was done constitutionally and lawfully,
that would be different. Yeah, that would be different, right? This was all done
illegally, constitutionally, so we actually have remedy. The phrase we use has been revolution, restoration, or stay the course. That's the three directions we can go in. And, revolution is just, something new. Let's have a Bolshevik revolution. Let's, do something like that. A restoration is what we're talking about. We can restore what was illegally taken from us, or stay the course and just pretend nothing's ever really happened and just, keep voting Democrat and Republican and see where we get. And we say
that future to me doesn't look good. You guys, I'm a Trump supporter. Not you that are with me tonight. My listeners, I'm a Trump supporter. But I'm telling you, the avenue that we have taken and the avenue we continue to take, even though this man is doing good, I'm not going to take anything away from him. It doesn't matter how much good somebody does if it's still under the guise of deception. This is my problem with the whole thing. In some ways, I wish I hadn't learned this because my back's up against the wall, and this is a very difficult decision for me to make. But this is the truth. This is something that was intended for us that is not with us today. And I totally 100% believe, just like the analogy I gave a few minutes ago, somebody coming to you, deceiving you, taking something from you, you finding out later and wanting it back. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's what we're asking for. We want what it was originally intended for us. How many times have you heard me say things are upside down? Look at what we're talking about tonight. And this is one of the reasons that things are upside down. The rights that we have thought that we had, we really don't have. And yet we see these people abusing their oath, and yet they're continuing to get away with it. Any one of us would do 1/100th of anything that they've done. My God, we'd be so far behind bars we wouldn't see daylight. So things are not the way that they are supposed to be. And if we continue the course, which is one of the options, we can just leave everything go and let the chips fall where they may. Well, too many of us have done that for too long because that's where we are today. I was one of them. I kept saying, no, I'm not going to get involved. No, this isn't for me, blah, 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 blah. And this is where we are today. People who are running for the highest office in this country brazenly threatening people like me, because I have a weapon, who they would consider an assault weapon, threatening me to come to my home and take my weapon from me and remove my ability to defend myself. That's a calling of war. And I want to do whatever I can to get away from that. So we can leave things the way they can, which John said, and I agree with. That's one of the options. We can restore. We can take something that's all has been corroded and just looks very ugly and has no value any longer, And through the correct steps, we can take that and restore it back to its original beauty and restore its integrity. Or we can just have an all-out revolution. And that's my fear. That really, truly, I have really never feared that in my life until just recently. The talk that I hear coming from the Capitol Hill, when you have representatives openly saying we're going to have the president arrested, we're just figuring out how we're going to do it. Openly saying things like these. You have celebrities openly saying, I hope this man gets murdered. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what they said. We know things are wrong, guys. This is one of the reasons. This is probably the base, the root of why things are wrong. Because we're not in the kind of government that was intended to be. And there is a way to return to that. And the way that is clear for me is restoration, because I know what war can do. Excuse me.
I don't want to belabor this point too much, but I would like to ask John to speak to something, because he does a better job of speaking on this particular point than I do usually. He's said this many times. You use the example of someone coming into your house and deceiving you and stealing from you, and that is a good example, but I would offer that there's a slightly more appropriate example. It's not that the thief came into your home and took something. They actually are in your house right now. They're still here, and they are occupying your home and claiming that it's theirs. And so that is, what they've stolen isn't something out of your house; it's your house. And what I want to ask John, if he would, to elaborate a little bit, just briefly, on John Locke's Second Treatise of Government. There was a portion in there where he speaks to that exact possibility and how it's the right of generations onward, down the line, to come back and try to reclaim what they've lost, how it's a natural right. So, John, I'm sure you know what I'm getting at. Would you? I think you can do it better than I can.
Well, I don't know about that. You're pretty adept at doing all this stuff. I feel that people are in good hands when you're talking with them also. But yeah, here's one of the things that we've got going on is a lot of people say, hey, it's water under the bridge. That happened so long ago. And there's certain concepts in law that if people don't do something within 20 years, then, there's no remedy to it. And so we get that quite a bit from people and so what it boils down to in the situation we're in now is there is no statute of limitation on a constitutional act. But what John Locke says is if you have a people that have their rights stolen from them, they're subjugated by an unjust conqueror is what Locke is talking about, then if the attitude of the time or the passions of the time do not allow them to recover their lost sovereignty, then it says that, well, when times get better, maybe their children or their children's children can remedy this. And this is where we're at today is, we're not the direct injured party, but we are the posterity of the injured party. And we have a right to reclaim our birthrights is what this is all about through legal process. So, yeah, John Locke is the one that just opened the door and says, if the people have their governments or their body conquered unjustly, if they can't get it back, their children or their children's children have a right to get it back, and that's where we're at.
I just thought that was an important point to make, and I feel like John says it a little more eloquently than I do.
Well, I think both of you are pretty good at it. I want to ask the listeners, are you happy with the government that you have today? Truly, ask yourself an honest question. I'm not kidding. Go stand before the mirror, look yourself in the eye, and ask yourself this question. Am I happy with the government that I have today? Knowing now that the government that is in place has been put there by deception. It's not there with authority. It's there by power. It hasn't derived its power from the people like it's supposed to. It has forced itself into play through a massive deception that continues to this day. Do you like the idea of people who are in authority mandating that you get injected with something, forcing you, if they have to be injected, God knows with what, forcing you to buy something? They don't have the authority to do this. They have the power. They have the power by the end of a barrel kind of power. That's the power that they're yielding. This is tyranny that we're living under today. And sadly, many of you don't even recognize it because you've grown up in it. It seems like normal to you. It's not normal. It's not normal for us to be at war for 20 freaking years. All these people's lives that we're ruining. And part of this is our responsibility. The money that is used to fight these wars is money that we pay in taxes. We got to put an end to this stuff. This is really, and I know I'm not the only one that feels this way. We've got to come to a point where we reach in this country, have a government that is representing the people. And that's not what's happening today. And
I was reading an article just before I came on the show tonight. Actually, it was a Reason article, and it was about media. And I just want to read 2 sentences out of this because it speaks directly to your question, Riscalla. It was about media, like I said. So the 2 sentences are this. It says, according to polling done for the Columbia Journalism Review, fewer than 20% of us have, quote, a great deal of confidence, unquote, in the press. The only institution held in lower esteem than the media, is Congress. So fewer than 20% of Americans have a great deal of confidence in the press, and fewer than that have confidence in Congress. That's amazing to me.
I think that
the good news in that, though, is that while we don't have much confidence in the quote-unquote press, we have great confidence in the internet to be able to find information on our own, even though we're going to sources that may not actually be easily vetted. We can at least go and do our own, scrutiny, use our own scrutiny to determine whether the things that we're finding are legitimate or not. And we can then disseminate that to others, and there's almost like a natural sifting of the truth from the fiction that I think is probably one of the best gifts we've been given in the latter part of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century, was having this wonderful internet put in front of us to at least give us some. Can you imagine if we didn't have the internet? What would be going on right now?
The closest,
the internet is definitely a silver lining, but I would qualify that, David. I would say that is largely dependent upon people's ability to engage in critical thinking.
True.
And
of course.
I have mixed reviews about that.
Well, but then, let's go back to the last show and some of the thoughts that I threw out there about the different types of ignorance. And the one that I led with was perpetrated ignorance.
Right.
And that's really what the problem is that we need to understand that we have been duped in every way by every single possible mechanism for the ability to snooker us. And I use that as a highly technical term, by the way. And it has forced us into what I shared of being the delusion of non-ignorance, which is when the head tends to swell. And you think you know what you don't know, and what you think you know ain't so, and yet you believe that it's the truth. And these are the problems, the nuances that we have got to get our minds wrapped around. We've got to be willing to step back and say humbly, I might not quite know what I think I know. And if we can't get to that point, we're in serious trouble. But that's one of the things about this show and the things that we're doing here over these last few weeks is we're helping people understand that, hey, maybe there's some things that we've got to learn that we just don't have a handle on at the moment. And so, that's where I can see, because what we want to get to is conscious ignorance. And we can get there, then I believe there's hope for us. But if we don't get there, we're in some really deep trouble.
All right, I'm up against a break, so before I go, I wanted to give John. I didn't want to keep John too long on tonight because I know he's got other stuff going on, and I'm ever so grateful for every moment that he can spend with us. John, anything you want to share before I ask you, to go ahead and head off? Unless you want to stick out with us, I mean, you're welcome to stay. I know that you've got other stuff going on, so it's up to you.
Well, yeah. The other stuff I've got going on is called sleep. This 11 to midnight stuff is it's tough on me. I'm a morning person, not a late night person. But I believe you're in very good hands with Milo and David both there to put out these ideas and concepts. And I just want to go on one thing that I heard David say. The phrase that I came up with years ago on that on the ignorance is people who are arrogant in their ignorance. In other words, they hold a position that they're extremely arrogant of how right they are, and they really don't have a clue what the issues are. But yeah, it's kind of neat to see that we both came to the same conclusion of what the type of people are that are out there that is a problem. We just came up with two different phrases for it.
Yep, I would agree with you, John.
Well, Riscalla, I do appreciate you having me on, and again, I think Dave and Milo are going to do a great job, and I really appreciate what your passion that you've got for this and that you see it. This is one of those things that once you see it, you can't
unsee it. You can't unknow it. It's just one of the things that. And now I'm in a quandary. We've got to find a way. I've been asking God for so long. God, there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way. This just doesn't seem right. And I don't know spit about law and how all this stuff came together. I just knew in my heart and in my gut, something did not feel right about what was happening in this country, more and more and more. And you have to be pretty much sleeping under a rock not to recognize that something is very wrong. And now coming across this and realizing that this is a vital component to rectifying everything, to getting things right. As long as you live under a lie, I don't think anything will ever be perfectly right, because you're living under a lie. And what we're trying to do is open the lie up so that everybody sees it and say, okay, wipe the slate clean and go back to the way it's supposed to be. Restore it. Take that old rusty piece of whatever it may be and clean it up, buff it back up, bring the shine back up, put integrity back into it, bring the beauty back. That's what we want. We've lost all of that.
Yeah, we absolutely have. And this is one of the beauties of this is not a me movement. This is an us movement. It takes the different talents. It takes the people who have looked at this from different directions. It takes people who have the abilities to do things that some of us can't. I can't do it all. David can't do it all. Riscalla, you can't do it all. Milo can't do it all. It takes us all coming together with our own individual talents and abilities to come together and figure this thing out. And, Lord willing, if we don't glorify him, we're building on a foundation of sand. And so we've just got to get back to be a godly people, a moral people who want to do what's right and just rather than do what is just best for me.
I agree with you 100%. Those of you who listen to me know I don't believe in religion, but I do believe it was never about religion. It's always been about relationships. If you look at the Bible and you read the Bible, you see it's one story after another, and each one is a relationship. That's what it's been about. The relationship that you and I have, the relationship that you and your friends have, relationships. That's what it's about, building and strengthening relationships, because God told us in the very beginning, together we can do anything. Building the Tower of Babel, he had to come down and confuse everybody because we were so doggone smart, we were going to be too smart for our pants. But that was the point being, is that once we are all of one heart and one mind and one spirit, there's nothing that we can't do. Nothing. And that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see a future for my grandkids where they're not growing up thinking that war is normal. You understand that we have 19-year-olds today that think that war is normal. Their whole life we have been at war. What a horrible way to go through life. It was hard enough for me to deal with it just with Vietnam and the short time it was in my lifespan. To imagine your whole life your country's at war, and you can't help but think it's normal. Hey, why would they think any different? And it's not normal. And these are the things that we need to change. One of the ways we can do that, what I'm thinking about is go to www.americasremedy.com. Americas with an S, AMERICAS, remedy.com. Pick up the DVD. I'm telling you, this thing is so packed, and I'm not doing this just because John's on the show. I did it last time. This thing is so jam-packed full of information, you'll have a better idea of what we're talking about, because some of this is like, when I would talk about math with some people, it just go right over their heads because it's not something you talk about all the time. So the language and the perception and the imagery that we're talking about, sometimes people can't imagine this. I can imagine a better way of life for each and every one of us, you and me and John and David and Milo and all the listeners, a better way of life. We have been cheated out of so many things, and we're not going to be able to get them back until we start at the very root of it all. The very root of it all is what we're talking about tonight. Don't go away. We'll be right back. John, God bless you, my friend. You're an awesome man. Thank you for what you do. I look forward to having you back on sometime in the future and giving us an update.
Thanks, Riscalla. Have a great night.
Good night, my friend. We'll be right back. Oh, that is if this will work. Here we go.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin.
You're listening to the Red Pill Reality Show on the LNM Network. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Being a dad is an adventure full of special moments.
A cruise? Surprise!
Unexpected moments.
I got this.
And even awkward moments.
Okay, Dad, thank you.
But every moment you spend with your kids, even the smallest moments, can make the biggest impact on your child's life. So take a moment to be a dad today.
There's a lot of fear in coming back to school. I wasn't sure if I could do it. I'm a 40-year-old man that walked in there to get his high school diploma. It was very hard for me, but the teachers, the counselors, they help you. One of the teachers was Miss Araceli. Miss Araceli, she gave me direction. Every single time I had a question, she'll put down whatever she's doing and she'll come over and she'll sit there with you until you get it.
Thank you, Ms. Araceli. I know you make a difference in people's lives because of the person and teacher you are. I wanted to be here because I wanted to thank you for helping me get a beautiful gift.
50% of getting your high school diploma is walking through those doors. The other 50% is doing the work. Getting your high school diploma, it is a life-changing experience. It really is.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Have you ever heard of Audible? Audible is a website with hundreds of thousands of audiobooks. They're all high quality, easy to listen to, and, best of all, if you take advantage of a special deal that we've worked out for you, you can get one for free. That's right, a free audiobook of your choice in any genre, simply by going to audibletrial.com/openeyes and signing up for the free trial. It's simple to do, and it would support the shows that we bring to you, and hey, you get a free book out of the whole thing. So why not take advantage of it today? Go to audibletrial.com/openeyes and sign up for the trial.
Ask 10 different scientists about the environment, population control, genetics, and you'll get 10 different answers. But there's one thing every scientist on the planet agrees on. Whether it happens in 100 years, or 1,000 years, or 1,000,000 years, eventually our sun will grow cold and go out. When that happens, it won't just take us. It'll take Marilyn Monroe, and Lao Tzu, and Einstein, and Morobuto, and Buddy Holly, and Aristophanes. All of this was for nothing. Unless we go to the stars.
Do you need toner for your Epson, Hewlett-Packard, Canon, Brother, Apple, or Sharp printers? Look no further than Laser Technologies. In business for over 20 years, they offer the lowest prices on toner on the web. They can also repair your laser printers and toners fast and easy. Call their expert staff today at 561-792-9600 or email us at service@laser-technologies.com for all your toner needs. All toner is shipped nationwide. Why wait? Get the lowest prices on toner. Call or email us today.
While other stations just talk a good game, we win it.
Hey, sounds like somebody's having a lot of fun.
Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. You take the red pill, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, 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 take the red. You stay in Wonderland. You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Goes, 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 goes,
Now, from sunny South Florida, it's the Red Pill Reality Show with your host, Riscalla. Every Saturday night from 9 p.m. to midnight on the L&M Network. And now, your host, Riscalla.
All right, we are back. It is the Red Pill Reality Show. It is truly an honor and privilege to have you listen in and allow me to share with you some of this information that, particularly this information that I've come across here in the last couple of months. Disturbing but refreshing. Disturbing in the sense that, again, yet another deception. And those of you who have listened to me know that I have described the deception like an onion. It's just layer after layer after layer. Everywhere we turn, there's a deception, whether it's religion, whether it's money, whether it's healthcare. No matter what the heck it is, there's some layer of deception in there. It seems like there's no honesty anymore. And then, to find out about this, to find out that our nation was literally overthrown in the late 1800s, and that's why everything started to make more sense to me. That's why we live in a situation where more people have been killed by police officers over the last 19 years than soldiers have died in the war. Upside down. It's not supposed to be that way. The police departments have become militarized. They carry weapons of war with them wherever they go. But what's worse than that, not only have they become militarized physically, they become militarized mentally. And many of them look at you, at me, as the enemy. They don't know anything about us. We're the enemy. This is what has been conditioned into their minds. That things are not right. And it would behoove me to sit here and try to argue with somebody that this is the best it can be. I'm sorry. I have said long before I came across this information, I have said we deserve better. You go back and listen to any of my archives. Go back any time before 2 months ago. You will hear me say many times, America, we deserve better. We have shed our blood for this country. We deserve better. We have paid the price. We're not asking for something that doesn't belong to us. We're only asking for what is right. And now that I have come across this information, it all begins to make sense to me. Why things are upside down, why we have a government that doesn't represent us, openly in our face, declaring war on us, telling us they're going to house to disarm us, to take away our God-given right. No man gave you that right. But yet this government is hell-bent on trying to create a war. These people that are within our government, that's more accurate. These people that are within our government, and some of them that are running for the highest office in this government. This is what they're openly, brazenly saying to you. If you cannot recognize that there is something wrong today, just turn me off and go back to sleep. Go have some potato chips, sit on the couch, watch whatever it is that you watch that makes you happy. Turn me off, because you're not helping. This is a very, very serious matter that we're discussing tonight. And I purposely brought up the portion of a revolution, a physical revolution, an overthrowing of the government. This is not what we're trying to do at all. I want to make absolutely clear to people, because I know that they listen in as well. We're not advocating any violence. We're not advocating an overthrow of anything. We're advocating a restoration. That's what I'm advocating. I know that's what John's advocating. I'm pretty sure that David and Milo are advocating restoration. John brought up an excellent point. We have three options here. We can have a violent revolution, or we can restore. We can take something that has corroded and looks ugly and has lost its value and its integrity, and we can restore it. And I believe we could restore it to better than it was in its original state, because we have more knowledge today than we did then. Or we can do nothing and just let the chips fall where they may. Is that what you want for your future? If you're a parent, for your children, if you're a grandparent like me, if you're someone like me who has literally witnessed the deterioration of this country over the last several decades, and now it all begins to make sense to me. Because it was all done under deception. It was all done under military power. People were literally taken out of office under military power and replaced with other people. Do you understand the ramification of that? That's not America. But yet that's what happened. And then there's example after example after example where the government has come in and literally just... Waco, Texas. What happened in Waco, Texas? What did those people do that was so god-awful wrong that they were incinerated before our eyes? What happened at Ruby Hill? That they literally murdered this man's wife while she held her baby. He murdered his son, they murdered his dog, and then later on they found that he did nothing wrong. After all of that, this is the government that we're talking about. Is that a government for the people, by the people? It doesn't seem to be for me. I never asked any of these people to declare war in Iraq. They never asked me. I'm one of the people. And the more people that find out, the longer that these wars go, the more people find out this is all nonsense in the sense of the idea that these people were a threat to us. Baloney. They were not a threat to us. There was just a lot of money to be made and lives to be ruined. I'm sorry. I don't mean to get emotional about this, but that's the truth of this matter. There are probably millions of people who we have brought hell upon because of our, quote, Iraqi freedom. We've created a hell for these people. In Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, openly murdered, a man who had an 80% acceptance rate in his country, over 80%. A man who housed everybody. A man who said to his people, I'm not going to even live in a house until all the people are housed. That's the kind of guy we're talking about. You need to go to school. The government has enough money. We'll pay for you to go to school. The taxes were little to few. If you were a couple, you were getting married, and you were going to live and dedicate your life to that country, you got $5,000. If you were a farmer and you needed equipment to farm your land, as long as you agreed that the food would not leave the country, they pay for your stuff. This is the kind of man that they killed because they said he was a, quote, terrorist. Yeah, he was a terrorist. He was a terrorist to them. Why? Because he introduced gold-backed money. And that's a direct threat to the Federal Reserve, another illegal entity that we are dealing with on a daily basis here in this country. Isn't it time to put this to an end? Really, truly. Isn't it time that we start living in the truth of all of this? Because all of this that is being done to us is being done to us because of a major lie that happened back September 11th. Another major lie, another deception. These are the kind of people that have been running our government and in turn basically, some cases directly affecting our lives. I think it's time to put an end to it. And why I'm doing what I'm doing repeatedly on this, with this subject on this show, is because I truly believe 100% this is a viable way to restore this country. Because, again, we have three choices. Two of them are not acceptable to me. It's not acceptable to sit back and do nothing. You know, I've given the analogy of if we were walking along, you and I are walking along the street, you happen to be on the street side and we're carrying on a conversation. You're so deep into the conversation that you don't see that there's a car coming at you. And I'm telling you, there's a car coming and you're not saying it, you're not responding. Don't you think for a moment I'd grab you by the arm and pull you out of the way? Well, that's what we're trying to do tonight. We're trying to give you the knowledge to pull you out of this corrupted system that has been brought upon us by deception, and out of the danger that this system is truly, it is a dangerous system. You'll never be able to convince me otherwise. Look at the statistics of how many citizenry get murdered every year. And it's not by just criminals. Compare that to the number of law enforcement individuals that are involved in some kind of a shooting where the individual is shot and killed is not even armed. Now it begins to make sense to me because it's all under a deception. That's why it's upside down. That's why these people do what they do day in and day out and can get away with it. Smile in your face while we do 1/1000th of what they do and end up behind bars. So far behind bars we probably wouldn't see daylight for the rest of our lives. I say it's time to put an end to it. All right, let me welcome back Milo first. Milo, thank you for taking the time to call in. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for hanging on. I greatly appreciate you being here, my friend.
Not a problem. Thank you.
And David, without David, none of this would happen. And Angel, I think Angel's listening. Angel, thank you, because without Angel, I wouldn't have met David. Without David, I wouldn't have met Milo. I wouldn't have met John, and a couple of others, Paul, and another one slips my mind right away. But so thank you, you guys. You know, again, it's like a puzzle. I think together we can get a whole heck of a lot more done than we can individually. And to me, this is something that is truly of vital importance for our future, particularly for those who are coming up. Anyway, all right, so one of the things that David is very liquid in is the discussion around we're supposed to have a militia for each state, and we don't have that, and what the purpose of that militia would be, and how the advantage would be of having a militia versus what we have now. We have a National Guard, so where would the loyalty be? All right, let me start that. Let me get David to start that off. Go ahead, Dave.
Hey, thanks, Riscalla. You know, before we go there, real quickly, you mentioned something in your little monologue you did there that I think is really important for us to wrap our minds around. And it has to do with a law of society. There's a guy by the name of Orrin Woodward that wrote a book called, I can't think of the name of the book right now. It's Justice, something of Justice. But anyway, I can't think of the name of the book. But anyway, in the book, he talks about the 5 laws of decline. And there are some principles that, you know, are just going on in society today that are really affecting the way that things are happening. And I've added a 6th law to his list because I think that there's a law of decline that is equally as important as the ones he's listed. I call it the Jefferson's Law, or the law of non-eternal vigilance. So I've taken Jefferson's phrase that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and I flipped it. If we're not vigilant, we're going to decline. And that's really what's going on today. People are scattered and just going off in their own thinking and their own ways of doing, you know, personal self-interest is taking over. and they're not concerned about the things we need to be concerned about. And that's our problem. We've got to somehow start, shouting from the rooftops, as the old saying goes, and yelling in the streets, wake up, people. Do you understand what's happening around you? Do you see what's coming? It's like a person standing in their house waving out the window from the second story balcony, and there's a fire behind them, and they don't even know there's a fire, and you're yelling from the streets, get out of the house, your house is burning down. That's really the kind of, analogies of what's going on. And the other thing that I talked about last week and the week before and the week before that is this concept of relevance. That we've got to start realizing what are the things we really need to be focusing on and get a list together and then, put that in the right priority so we start dealing with the first things first. So now coming back to your question about militia. I'd like to continue a little reading of this thing by Madison. It's actually the next paragraph, because what we're seeing happening, Madison was incredibly prescient. He was like a prophet of his day and didn't even realize he was going to be predicting what's coming, what was happening right now. In that part we just talked about that there's, if the state is working properly, it can check the national government, and the national government can check the state government if states are abusing their power. And he goes on and says the large size of the country is further security. In other words, when you have a big country, you can have more people to protect yourself. And in his context, he couldn't see what was coming, that there would be a way by which the Madisonian Republic was going to be undermined by the establishment of a financial power that was going to be so massive that it would even control the economics of our country, Federal Reserve. Which wow. and all of these individual, what he called factions, are all beholden to the Federal Reserve because they've got to get their money from the
somebody.
Fed.
Yeah.
See, so it was, and by the way, my dear friend Edwin Vieira, he has an 8-part video series, and he actually explains this in the video series that he does, these lectures he does, about that is the way that they undermined the Madisonian Republic and created the means by which our good system of government was going to be undermined. So the large size of a country is further security. We have seen how it protects against attacks from a foreign power. He was talking about the Revolutionary War. It would also be protection against usurpation by the ambitious national rulers. When citizens rebelled against the usurpation and the federal army stopped them in one state, distant states would raise fresh forces. So if you've got, some kind of a usurper at the national level, the other states would come in if there was a militia in place, and they would be able to help where maybe this, national tyrant was trying to, begin to pull his power into a certain state. The usurpers would abandon their advantage in the first state to subdue the opposition in others. The moment they left the first state, the resistance would revive. Military force can only be as strong as the resources of the country permit. For a long time to come, maintaining a large army will be impossible. He didn't see what we've got now because he didn't think we could ever get to where you could have a massive financial resource in the national government to allow it to happen.
Because it wasn't intended to be that way. Wasn't
right.
Yeah.
And then he says, as we are able to strengthen our military, the population and community strength will also increase because the militias will become more strong. Okay, or stronger. I got to use right English here. Therefore, and then this is this question he asks, when will the federal government be able to raise and maintain an army capable of erecting a tyranny over all the people of an immense empire? Well, Mr. Madison, we got it. It was about 230 years later. Remember when Riscalla, I don't remember I don't think you may have been quite old enough to remember when President Eisenhower left office and he gave that famous speech saying that you better be careful about the military-industrial complex.
I've seen the video, no, I wasn't.
But yeah, so we've seen the video, fortunately, and so that is now here. The people can, by using their state governments, defend themselves with the swiftness and organization of independent nations. He thought we'd always have the militia to be the check and balance against an overreaching standing army. But we don't have it anymore, you see. And then he says, this worry is like a disease that can't be cured with logic and reasoning.
That's true.
And the reason I read that is because the next sentence is from the next Federalist paper, number 29. And here's what it says. During an internal revolt or an invasion by a foreign nation, the militia helps keep peace and defend the Confederacy. And then he's going to go down through and say some things about this institution. He says, all members of the militia must have the same organization and discipline to get the best results. And uniformity requires national regulation of the militia. Therefore, the Constitution properly says that the Union will, quote, and this is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16, provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. And so what was supposed to happen was, and what the Constitution did, was it formalized the militia as a constitutional entity. They had existed up until the Constitution as state entities, and then back prior to the states as colonial or provincial entities, all the way back to the early 1600s. And they were the police power in the hands of the people. And one of the things that you shared that you were concerned about is that we've got now a government, quote unquote, the government is doing all these things and we have no power. But the reason is the people were supposed to be the government. George Washington, he wanted the militia to continue as a part of our government because he believed that it was the polity, the way the people are organized politically, that was the power of the militia. That all the people of the community, all the people trained to arms, is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state, according to the Virginia Declaration of Rights, Section 13. And so the point here is we need to sit back and think about what its real value is and what it really is we're talking about. And we need to admit that we don't know some things. I had some interesting experiences a couple times over the last couple of decades that really helped to frame why I'm so passionate about this. Back when 9/11 happened, I had already been carrying a Constitution in my back pocket for about 20 years back then. So I've carried one in my back pocket for about 40 years. And when the collapse of the buildings happened, I wrote a paper that went into a forum called, not a paper, but an article that went into a forum of an organization in the state of New York called Focus New York. And it was kind of like the local NRA chapter for the state of New York, or, Gun Owners of America, or Jews for Prevention of Fireside, or Protection of Fireside Ownership, or whatever. But this was the New York organization. And I wrote a paper back then about, maybe we need to start thinking about how we get the militia back to give us some security and safety after what happened, because I was a New Yorker at the time that the World Trade Center issue happened. And, it was my state that this happened in, right? And so I wrote this paper, and sadly, in retrospect, I wish I could find it. I've gone on the internet and tried to find archives of this organization to see if I could find it. I can't find it. But I know I said some things completely wrong in that paper because of things that I've learned since. And then in 2008, I did something kind of interesting. That summer, I had been a public school teacher in Central Florida, and I took a new job up in just over the border above Tallahassee in Thomasville, Georgia. And during that summer, I didn't have a job. And so what I did is I went to gun shows, and I took a whole bunch of pocket constitutions with me and gave them away to people walking through the gun shows. And I created a little plaque of the Second Amendment, and I sold that. And I probably gave away 400 or 500 at every show, and I did about 4 or 5 of them that summer. And I just want to have conversations with people about the Second Amendment, but not just about the part everybody talks about, which is the third clause. Okay? Which is the thing that everybody talks about, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But I wanted to talk to them about the other two clauses at the beginning. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state shall not be infringed. You can leave that third clause out. And so I was going to these shows, and I'm talking to people. But the thing, Riscalla, that I had wrong, which you and I have talked about in the past, I think we talked about it briefly on one of the previous shows, is a point that people have to understand. The well-regulated militia, the way I like to ask it, and I know I've asked you this before, is it public or private? And most people think it's private, and it's not. It's public. It's a governmental, state-based, civic, legislated organization. Well-regulated means it has a lot of regulations that govern how it functions. And that well-regulated militia, in 2008, when I was going to these shows, I thought it was private. I had no clue it was public. It wasn't until I began to read Vieira's material that I understood that it's a public entity. And the proof of that is by the pages and pages and pages of statutory language in every one of the colonies, the original 13 colonies, and then in every state up until the Dick Law of 1903. And even from that point forward, all they did was they altered their state regulations to make their National Guard the militia of the state, though it's not the militia. They took the term of art and flipped it and made them national troops in the states rather than state troops in the states. And that's what has caused so much of the problem. You know, we didn't have police departments in most communities in this country until after the Dick Law was completed. We didn't have any police in any part of the country, in any city, until 1841. Nowhere. And so, you know, we think that police has always been there. It hasn't. It was the militia that was the police power, was the law enforcement of the communities, and it was the men of the communities being called to service as part of their duty in their communities. That was vested authority in the hands of the men themselves. And so, getting back to that thing about, you know, we're concerned about what, you know, the government is doing. Well, somebody's going to do it. It's either going to be us doing it or we're going to allow someone else to do it. And that's what's happening more and more and more until now. They're about to say, well, you don't need the guns anymore. So, you know, that's just a few thoughts that
it's not stopping
the right track.
It's not stopping just at the guns. You need to be injected.
Oh, no.
You know, it's
what happens when they take away the guns? That's when they start. That's when democide happens. Death by government.
Well, yep. Sadly, that is true. Milo, your comment?
Oh well, I was just listening again. Well, I had a couple of thoughts as David was reading. I know he mentioned this earlier when John was on. He was reading from the Federalist paper, and I didn't know which one it was at the time. I may have missed.
It's 28.
A number. Yeah, it's 28. I know that you mentioned that here this last time you read the final paragraph from that. So yeah. I did want to say something about that. The first thing, and this is just, I'm not trying to call you out at all, David, because I wasn't aware till I looked it up online just a minute ago. But it was actually Hamilton. It wasn't Madison.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So I find it interesting that so much of this conversation has a lot to do, and even you, Riscalla, you were talking about financial angles on not only the Iraq War but the Federal Reserve. I mean, it all ties in together. This is a little off topic, but I just want to say the first person that I ever heard publicly say that the Iraq War was not about some little Kuwaiti girl, that it was about currency, was Robert Newman, who did a really interesting, he's actually an anarchist, and although I'm not an anarchist, I have a great appreciation of his skit called A History of Oil. And I don't know if either of you guys are familiar with that at all, but it came out a long, long time ago, like 2003 or 4, something like that. And it's a really good skit. If you've never seen it, I highly suggest you go look it up on YouTube and watch the whole thing. It's really awesome. But he makes that point in that skit. I mean, he's a comedian, but it's all very, very intelligent humor. And he makes that point about the reason we went into Iraq was because they were going to ditch the petrodollar. And
that's
I mean,
right.
how many Americans even know what the term petrodollar means? So that's one thing, is we need to start paying attention to things that matter, because the only reason our dollar has any value at all today, even as highly inflated as it is because it is the world currency for petroleum. And Iraq was one of the first nations that actually considered doing that, and that's why we went in the late 90s. So anyway, that's all sort of an aside, but it ties in because you're talking about finance and you're talking about the Federal Reserve, and obviously Iraq, and the reason we went in there the first time, at least, if not the second time also, was over currency. And Hamilton, as everybody is probably aware, if they, again, haven't been living under a rock, Hamilton was an enormous proponent of the first national bank of the U.S. It was his baby. And so as a mercantilist and a financier and the proponent of a national bank, which is essentially what the Federal Reserve is now, it strikes me as ironic, at least to some degree, that he's the one here in Federalist 28 talking about how, let's see, where are the exact words here, talking about when will the time arrive that the federal government can raise and maintain an army capable of erecting a despotism over the great body of the people of an immense empire, who are in a situation through the medium of their state government to take measures for their own defense. Well, it didn't take 230-something years for that to happen. It took about 90, because what he's describing there in question form, what he's hypothesizing and asking a little rhetorically, when could this possibly happen? Well, with the help of people who were financially inclined in exactly the same ways that Hamilton was, a president and a Congress did precisely what Hamilton inquires whether they'll be able to do it or not. In 1861, it happened. It happened when the states were still sovereign entities. It happened when the people did still have militias. It did happen. And I'm not saying any of this to try to disparage the value and the propriety of putting back into place that constitutional system, because it took over 15 violations of the Constitution, blatant violations of the Constitution, to make that happen. It only happened by both the effect of force and fraud. And what's right is right. Putting that system of original intent back in place, putting the system of a popular public citizen militia back in place, putting back into place lawful state government composed of state bodies of citizens, those things are all right. Those are the right answers. Those are the right ways to go, in my opinion, despite the fact that overwhelming force and financial shenanigans, I'm pointing at the debt-based society, because the federal government went into enormous debt during that war. And so those financial shenanigans of beginning to invent fake money, basically, relying on greenbacks, relying on debt to finance your war well beyond your means, and at the same time then using the armies that are raised by those financial shenanigans in order to impose unconstitutional acts and, well, just overthrow states, ultimately, was what it ended with.
That's what we've been doing.
All of that is, to me, just more indication that it's right to put back into place the system that was prescribed by original intent. But I do think it's a valid thing to bear in mind that those things aren't foolproof. I mean, it's kind of along the same veins of people saying that, well, it's the whole Lysander Spooner. If Congress was, if the Constitution were incapable, either the Constitution was incapable of preventing the abuses that we see, or it allows for them or prescribes them in some fact. I'm messing up his quote, I know, but Spooner made that quote. What he's forgetting is the Constitution by itself is just paper. It's words on paper. It can't defend itself, much less defend the people that it's supposed to provide protection for. Those people have to provide that protection. But even when those people in the state are organized in the way that they were originally organized into community and state militias, even when they had lawful government at their disposal, there's still no guarantee that tyranny might not prevail for a moment. And so I don't want to bring that example up. What he was reading here just brought all that into my mind. And I don't want to bring that example up as a way of disparaging the virtue inherent in putting that system back in place, but I just want people to be aware that on the one hand, Hamilton, it's crazy that he's the one sitting here saying this in Federalist 28. And on the other hand, then too, is that regardless of who said it, he's positing a hypothetical possibility that if we have this system in place under the Constitution, the way he's describing it, then all of these elements, all these systemic components will prevent any kind of usurpation. And that is not necessarily always going to be true, but that doesn't mean that it's not also our best chance. So I'm not trying to put down anything David's saying by any means. That's not my intent. All that I'm trying to say is that it's good for us to have a realistic outlook on this and to realize that all of this was right at one time, and then illegal acts and financial inventions subverted it. And I don't know where to go from there, really. I just wanted to make those points.
Yeah, one of the listeners. Wait a second. One of the listeners is saying even George Bush said the Constitution are words on paper. From my understanding, is that the Constitution was put in place to document what part of government's responsibility, and that part of that responsibility was to see to it that they defended the rights that were listed in the Constitution, not that we have constitutional rights. My understanding is we have no constitutional rights, because if we had constitutional rights, then all they have to do is tear up the Constitution and there go your rights. We have God-given rights, and the only authority that has the only person with the true authority to remove those would be God. Man can't remove those rights. So they have confused people into thinking that we have, again, this is my opinion, they've confused people into thinking that we have constitutional rights, therefore it's on black and white paper, and if we destroy the black and white paper, then you don't have rights anymore. That's not true.
Agreed.
Riscalla, could I be the devil's advocate on that?
Yeah.
One of the things that I've shared, I think it's the very first thing that I ever said after the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, is my quote of George Santa Anna, or Jorge Santa Anna, being corrected by Angel. He said, they who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I say that there must be a word added, which is bad. They who cannot remember the bad past are condemned to repeat it. You're not condemned for repeating good past. But my corollary is that they who can remember the good past are blessed to repeat it. However, they who cannot remember the good past gets what's coming to them. And if we go back and we then study the good past, going back to the days when the militia existed prior to the Revolutionary War, One of the things that is constantly amazing to me is the extent to which the men of that period that I call the founding generation, not the founding fathers, unless you want to say that all the men in all of the counties and all of the communities of all of the provinces were the founding fathers, I will give you that, okay? But I call it the founding generation because it also included the women of the society as well.
That's a good point, yeah.
You know, the wives that supported their men when they went off to fight and were there for them, you know, hand in hand when they protected the communities. You know, when you go and look at the history of the Revolutionary War, the British didn't get very far in to the into the landscape because they were pushed back by militia companies in every little community. And so, I mean, there was no way that that I believe that the British would ever have ultimately won the war. But even that being said, one of the things that's really interesting to understand is that there was a movement that happened back during the pre-revolutionary period called an association. And this is a pretty interesting historical understanding that most people don't have a clue about. I have copies of the document that was signed by men in their local militia companies where they were asked to subscribe to an association. That's the term of art. And a subscription is any time that you sign your name to a legal document. And they were signing their names that they were going to preserve freedom and that they would be committing their lives and fortunes. And these are phrases that are used in the document, okay? Until all of the, all of the disagreements was another word they used, between the government of Great Britain and the colonies be completely settled. And that they would take up defense against the invasion of the British government. And I submit that I believe that there could have been as many as 300,000 or more men that signed this document in the period just prior to and the few months after the start of the Revolutionary War. And so there was this incredible unity. And we were called the United Colonies before we were called the United States because the people of the communities were all united and they pushed back on the Tories. They actually, the last line of this oath that they took said, "We will hold them inimical," meaning unfriendly toward or hostile toward liberty, "who fail to subscribe this association." And then the committees of safety in the local community or the committees of observation in the local community would call out those men who failed to sign. And if they failed to change their mind, they were blackballed. They wouldn't buy their goods. They wouldn't do business with them, and essentially ran them out of town. This was a serious ideological process that was going on. And that's why there was a wherewithal amongst the men of every community that they were able to do things very quickly over extended geographical areas. And we really don't have an idea as to, how well organized it was. When it was organized out of this polity, the people organized politically in their local communities, where the local militia companies were the grassroots effort. So I guess, and getting back to what Milo you were talking about, the one thing that I think that needs to be understood is there was a breakdown that happened in the 1830s and 40s, began to happen in society. The great Justice Joseph Story of the Supreme Court wrote a 2-volume book on the Constitution. And in that book, he actually wrote a couple paragraphs where he was concerned that people were becoming very lackadaisical, very ambivalent about their militia. And it wasn't holding the same place of prominence and value in the communities anymore. And he was afraid that that was going to be something that was going to affect us down the road. Although it's really interesting that in that period between 1830 and 1850, the boys in the communities were practicing in their militia musters on a regular basis, so that when the atrocities of the North came about, Lincoln called the men to arms, and they didn't have to go and train to go south. And then the guys in the South, they didn't have to go train to protect themselves against the North. And somewhere between 700 and 800,000 men knew how to fight in a military fashion because they were trained long before the battles began. So, this is what we used to have as a polity in this country. And, for example, you hear terms that are thrown around like how the police walk a beat, or they talk about the local police ward, or they talk about the night watch. Those were all militia terms that were in the statutes of the colonial militia laws. We're just borrowing terms in the police departments that were terms that were used in the militia.
So would it be safe to say that if it was set up the way that it was supposed to be set up, that the balance would be in place where if the federal component of all of this decided that they wanted to go to war, would the state have the obligation? Maybe that's not the right word. Would the state have the option, or would the state be obligated, like we are now? We have no choice. They say go to war, we go to war. Would we be able to have the obligation to say, no, I don't think so?
Well, okay, let's talk about that a little bit. Where does the authority for sending our boys to foreign wars come from? Do you know?
Mm-mm.
The Selective Service Acts of the late 19 teens. Okay? See, part of this has to do with the history between the time that Mr. Ainsworth is bringing to the table and the First World War, which is the area that I've spent a lot of time studying, okay? What happened in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, 1900, 1910? What was going on during that period where this continued usurpation is rolling out? What I call the surreptitious subversion was taking place. What was happening was, at the end of the Civil War, you had almost 800,000 men who died in communities all over the country. It was over 1.4% of the population died. Okay? That's pretty significant. Okay? And this was the men. This would have been, fathers and leaders in communities, the colonels and the captains and the majors that went and fought in the war were probably the most prominent men in the communities. Many of them died. Many of them came back completely maimed. Okay? And by the way, the 800,000 so men was just the men who died. That's not the ones that came back maimed. This was a terrible period in our history of incredible suffering and pain mentally. You talk about PTSD.
Wow.
We didn't have a name for it back then, but just think about the trauma of that war. And they didn't have any of the psychological treatment kinds of things that we have today. So anyway, during this period, right after the war, the radical Republicans did their thing and got control of the government, where the state's powers was beginning to be reduced. One of the things that's interesting, there's a federal attorney by the name of Lana Marcuson, she's actually worked with the Native Americans for probably 40, 50 years. And I saw a video of hers a few years ago. She said that, I can't think, what's his name? The Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, was Lincoln's Secretary of War. He said toward the end of the war, we will never again allow the states to be able to perpetrate a civil war. Well, take away their militia. It's kind of hard for them to do it, Take away their powers as states, the citizens not being citizens anymore. you're not going to be able to do too much in having the states have any sovereignty within that respect. And so what happened is that they began to change the structure and the form of the militia. In 1886, there was a law passed in Illinois that reduced the militia of the state of Illinois down to 2,000 men. And there was a guy by the name of Presser who was bothered by that, and he happened to belong to a athletic club in the suburbs of Chicago or somewhere in Illinois, and he got the guys together and they followed the regulations of the militia company, and they went and trained, and they marched down a street, and the sheriff came and gave him a summons for $50 as a misdemeanor because he was leading a non-militia. And he fought it to the Illinois Supreme Court and lost, and he fought it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against him in Presser versus Illinois. And the thing that's interesting about that was the reason they said that he didn't have the right to do it was because that the Second Amendment didn't apply in a state action. It's kind of backwards to what they now say about, the Bill of Rights. And this is, again, as Milo, I'm sure, will be wanting to chime in, that, this is that because it was a nationalized event, and that the Bill of Rights is supposed to be a protection to prevent the federal government from doing something, not the states from doing something. So, these are the kind of things that, we technically we have to think about. But the point I'm making is that Presser, he knew that definition of the militia was all the people trained to arms. But it was being undermined. It was being thwarted. And between the 1870s and 1900, they were beginning to put in place some changes. And it even gets more nefarious because there was a guy by the name of Elihu Root. He was the Secretary of War under Teddy Roosevelt. Actually, McKinley appointed him, and then he became Teddy's Secretary of War. But you know what Elihu Root did for a living, Riscalla?
No idea.
Until he became Secretary of War.
Mm.
In 1877, he became the General Counsel of the First National Bank of North America in New York.
Mm.
And in the time of when he became Secretary of War in 1901, he was on the board of directors of that bank. He was a corporate banking attorney, and he became the Secretary of War in 1901 when the Dick Law was written. He wrote the law.
Wow.
And Charles Dick was the Major General of the Ohio National Guard, and he was the Adjutant General of the state's National Guard. But he became the president, maybe chairman of the board, one or the other, I can't remember which, of the Interstate Association of Officers of the National Guard of the United States.
Now, I think it's important. I'm not trying to cut you off, David, but
yeah.
I think it's important for you to highlight the fact that what you're talking about right now, when you say National Guard, what you mean are actual state militias that just called themselves the National Guard of, like, Ohio or New York or whatever. So they were a National Guard of a state.
This was the setup. Where did the term National Guard come from? It came from a speech that General Marquis Lafayette gave when he came back 50 years after the Revolutionary War and did a speaking tour across the United States. And in that, he gave a similar speech everywhere he went. And he said that the militia of the states is the Garde Nationale of this country. And what happened was, during the Civil War, in 1862, the state of New York passed a statute renaming the militia of New York as the National Guard of New York. And it was known as the New York Guard. And then several of the other states began to do the same thing. And you kind of sit back and go, who was behind that? It's just kind of weird, that you change the name. And what I think they were doing was they were setting it up so that when this change happened in the early 1900s, it would be, people would not be uncomfortable with the change of term of art.
Yep.
And I guess, is this conspiracy theory? I can submit to you that there's conspiracy fact here, because Charles Dick was the chairman of the Militia Subcommittee of the United States Congress. He was a congressman at the same time that he was the adjutant general of the National Guard of Ohio. And imagine that you were, this president, had several other generals as vice president and second vice president and third vice president. And the treasurer was probably a colonel. And these men are going to their officers in their National Guard units and saying, hey, guys, you need to join this organization. And in 1901, they created a pamphlet called the Dick Bill and Comments, a 35-page pamphlet, which became a lobbying piece for them to convince Congress to pass this law. It passed in a little over a year. And then for the next 7 years, next 5 years, they had to continue to lobby so all of the states would conform with the Dick Law of 1903. And it was an intentional re-engineering of the militia structure. I think I said it a couple weeks ago. If Congress was to create a law saying that every cat is a dog, and then said every dog will be on a leash, you'd see a bunch of cats on leashes, right?
Yeah.
Well, Congress passed a law saying that the National Guard is the organized militia of the state, territory, or District of Columbia. Okay? And yet that militia was federal troops. So what you're going to have is or national troops. You're going to have national troops in the states now because Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 says that no state without the consent of Congress will keep troops or ships of war in times of peace in the states. But if Congress gives consent and creates a law that you can have federal national troops in the states, then the states can have as many federal national troops as they want in the states. And that's what they did. And they're not the militia. In fact, in 1982, the United States Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on the Second Amendment, in their report, in the next last paragraph said, the National Guard is not the, quote, capital MILITIA, unquote, as described in the Second Amendment.
Wow. All right, we're up against a break. Let me take a quick break. You're listening to the Red Pill Reality Show. Tonight we started with John Ainsworth. If you want to find out more about John, you can find him at americasremedy.com. And then we followed up with Milo and David. And right now we're talking basically about the militia, what the militia is, why the militia is, and how that has been literally diverted away from us, and the benefits that have been taken from us because we don't have a, quote, militia. We have a National Guard. And how many times have I mentioned to you that they like to use these sweet words that tickle your ears, that make things sound so nice. The Patriot Act had nothing to do with being a patriot, everything to do with taking more and more of your rights away. The National Defense Authorization Act, another deceptive act to do nothing more than steal rights away from us and create havoc within our society. Anyway, let me go to the break and then we'll be back. Don't go away. It's the Red Pill Reality Show.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin.
You're listening to the Red Pill Reality Show on the LNM Network. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Being a dad is an adventure full of special moments.
A cruise?
Surprise! Unexpected moments.
I got this.
And even awkward moments.
Okay, Dad, thank you.
But every moment you spend with your kids, even the smallest moments, can make the biggest impact on your child's life. So take a moment to be a dad today.
There's a lot of fear in coming back to school. I wasn't sure if I could do it. I'm a 40-year-old man that walked in there to get his high school diploma. It was very hard for me, but the teachers, the counselors, they help you. One of the teachers was Miss Araceli. Miss Araceli, she gave me direction. Every single time I had a question, she'll put down whatever she's doing and she'll come over and she'll sit there with you until you get it.
Thank you, Miss Araceli. I know you make a difference in people's lives because of the person and teacher you are. I wanted to be here because I wanted to thank you for helping me get a beautiful gift.
50% of getting your high school diploma is walking through those doors. The other 50% is doing the work. Getting your high school diploma, it is a life-changing experience. It really is.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Have you ever heard of Audible? Audible is a website with hundreds of thousands of audiobooks. They're all high quality, easy to listen to, and, best of all, if you take advantage of a special deal that we've worked out for you, you can get one for free. That's right, a free audiobook of your choice in any genre, simply by going to audibletrial.com/openeyes and signing up for the free trial. It's simple to do, and it would support the shows that we bring to you, and hey, you get a free book out of the whole thing. So why not take advantage of it today? Go to audibletrial.com/openeyes and sign up for the trial.
Ask 10 different scientists about the environment, population control, genetics, and you'll get 10 different answers. But there's one thing every scientist on the planet agrees on. Whether it happens in 100 years, or 1,000 years, or 1,000,000 years, eventually our sun will grow cold and go out. When that happens, it won't just take us. It'll take Marilyn Monroe, and Lao Tzu, and Einstein, and Morobuto, and Buddy Holly, and Aristophanes. All of this was for nothing. Unless we go to the stars.
Do you need toner for your Epson, Hewlett-Packard, Canon, Brother, Apple, or Sharp printers? Look no further than Laser Technologies. In business for over 20 years, they offer the lowest prices on toner on the web. They can also repair your laser printers and toners fast and easy. Call their expert staff today at 561-792-9600 or email us at service@laser-technologies.com for all your toner needs. All toner is shipped nationwide. Why wait? Get the lowest prices on toner. Call or email us today.
While other stations just talk a good game, we win it.
Hey, sounds like somebody's having a lot of fun.
Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. You take the red pill, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, 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 take the red. You stay in Wonderland. You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Goes, 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 goes,
Now, from sunny South Florida, it's the Red Pill Reality Show with your host, Riscalla. Every Saturday night from 9 p.m. to midnight on the L&M Network. And now, your host, Riscalla.
All right. It is the Red Pill Reality Show. An honor and a privilege to have you listen in. Tonight we have been talking about something that, oh my gosh, I think we're sixth show now, talking about the subject. I found out about this, wasn't looking for this really. And not directly. I mean, indirectly I was. Been looking for an answer to try to figure out and make sense of what is going on today when we talk about things like our government and the things that they do. I knew that things weren't right. I mean, anybody who's been listening to me knows I've been saying from the very beginning things are not right. Well, now it's all beginning to make sense. When you're living a lie, I don't think anything is going to be perfectly right as long as you're living in a lie. And that's basically what this government that we have in place today is. It was brought in under a false pretense, and in some cases by military force. And the result is what we're seeing today. Upside down. What's right is wrong, what's wrong is right. What's up is down, what's down is up. Nothing makes sense. Having found this out, it really does begin to allow me to wrap my head around it better, I guess is the best way to describe it. Because it's all been a lie. It's another deception. And we're under so many lies today. It is sad when you think about the people who put this effort into doing these things to us are very intelligent people. Even though they're criminals, they're very intelligent people. If they could take that intelligence and instead of use it for their own good, use it for the betterment of everybody else. Could you imagine the society? You talk about living in the Jetsons society. We'd be there today, literally. We would have cars that didn't require roads. But because of greed and a variety of things, but primarily deception, this is where we're at today. There has to be a better way out. Well, that's what we're talking about. There is a better way out. There is a legal way out. There is a way that we can ask for what is rightfully ours back. That's what we're talking about. All right, we are back. I have Milo Townsend and I have David Callihan with me tonight. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Let me go to David first this time, real quickly. Let me back up a minute. Let me go to Milo real quickly because we spent a couple of minutes with Dave. Milo, anything that you want to add to David's comments and what he was saying regarding the militia?
I don't really have a whole lot to add to that at the moment. I think he's doing a really good job of laying out some of the history of how the militia was undermined by the National Guard, and I'd like to allow him to continue to explain this, but I want to put one thing out there and hope that his explanation from here forward can address this issue. Someone that I'm speaking to online here, who is listening to the show, he says, we have a legal remedy. Why are we talking about the other option? And so with regard to, I guess other option, what he means is, why are we talking about using force or putting ourselves in a potential position to be able to resort to force in self-defense? I had my own answer to that I wrote to him in Messenger, but I'd like for David to address that if he would.
Sure. By the way, one of the little cute terms that I use about militias, I call it the M word. Because a lot of people don't want to use the term. They're afraid of it.
Yeah, it's been villainized.
Yeah, it's been completely villainized, and sadly, because that's what they want to do, is get us to where we don't even want to take a constitutional term of art and use it in standard conversation. It's been completely misnomered. It's not a bunch of guys in camouflage outfits playing army in the woods with guns
on the weekend.
It's not private. It's public, and it's statutorily administered. But we have a lot to discuss with relation to the M word. I believe it's one of the most misunderstood and misapplied words in the 21st century, but it's one of the most vital ideas of our time. If we could wrap our minds around it and get it back in the right perspective. Because what we need to understand is that it's not in isolation, like it's its own thing and it doesn't have any connection to anything else. It's actually an institution constitutionally that affects all aspects of government. The militia, as we will see, it must operate within the entire structure of society as a necessary, vital, organic component of civil and private society. By the way, that word necessary is a constitutional word. It's in the Second Amendment. The well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Meaning, if you don't have the well-regulated militia, do you have a free state? No, because it's necessary to the security of a free state. And, well, I mean, you could say you have a free state, but it's not a secure free state. But I think I could argue, I think it would be logically easy to prove that if you don't have the security of a free state, you probably don't have a free state either.
At least not very long.
Yes, and the point is that it's a vital organic component of both the civil and private society. And why would that be so? Because the militia protects the tools of the economy and finance and elections. You know, how do you know that the votes are being counted? Your safety and your security in your state, all the way down to the local community. For instance, what happens when a hurricane is coming in Florida? What if you had a well-defined, pre-planned scenario that all the people of the communities knew exactly what to do as they knew that the incident was coming? Or if you're in the middle of Kansas and there's tornadoes, or you're near a nuclear power plant, what is the pre-plan? Where would be the involvement of the citizens in the protection of their communities? These are emergencies. What about the issue of education? Wouldn't it seem that that would be an area where we could have some protection? We could have some thinking through how education should be done locally, where there's an officership within the militia in which your educators participated, for example. Let's take Stoneman Douglas, I got to get the name right, high school. Imagine if there was a scenario by which, like the militia law used to be, where every able-bodied male 16 and over was required to maintain a weapon, and they were trained in a state regulated, under the authority of the adjutant general of the state, local militia company to protect their school as 16, 17, and 18-year-olds in the militia company, with officers that were adults, that maybe teachers or police officers or others that had, or firemen or others that had some experience, and they were the officers assigned to the development of that protection. Because remember, the kids, after that incident happened at that high school in February a couple of years ago, they organized March for Your Lives and said, parents, you got to figure out how to protect us. Well, maybe putting a militia law in place would have been a good way to protect them, where they would be involved in their own self-preservation. It's just some thoughts. And then it also is a tool for the civil government itself, in the sense of how we're supposed to operate in aspects such as state protection, which the National Guard is doing now, and really doesn't, because they get deployed to foreign wars, and then we have to sit back and maybe put in place a defense force that can only be in the state when the National Guard's outside of the state, but it's still part of the standing army. It's not part of the state military in the real sense, because when the National Guard comes back, it has to go away. And then what about law enforcement? And by the way, here's a good question. When a cop breaks the law, who arrests the cop? And what if you happen to be there as a citizen watching this cop break the law, and you have no authority to arrest that cop? That used to not be so. It used to be that you had a vested authority as a militiaman that you could detain and execute power of arrest. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15, and I'm trying to get to answering your question, Milo, says that Congress shall provide for calling forth the militia to do three things: execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Okay? That's the only three things that the militia does when called into the actual service of the United States under Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1. When the President is Commander-in-Chief of the militia when called into the actual service of the United States. He is the only federal officer in the militia. No other federal officer is in the militia. They're all state officers. But the point is, the militia is always defensive, never offensive. And so the question that was asked by that fellow or lady online or whatever was, why are we going to this military answer? It's not, or this answer that seems like it's another answer. It's not another answer, because if you have a bear or a lion or a wolf attacking you, but they don't have any claws or teeth, they're not much of a threat. And Mao Zedong said that political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. There must always be some means by which you can protect yourself in the event of an attack, in the event of an altercation, in the event of some kind of a positive offense toward you. If you don't have the same tool to respond, you have no defense. And so the point is that we're standing around like the people in Ferguson were back during that event, where they were face to face with SWAT teams. By the way, it looked a lot like what a well-regulated militia would look like, except they weren't. They had all the weapons, and the people are standing there boldly. And if you've seen, remember that picture that was, I think it was on the front of one of the major magazines, of the people in that community just standing face to face with this whole row of very well garbed in flak jackets and shields and helmets and clubs and a few with automatic weapons. And the people are just there in their clothes. And, yet, I commend them for their bravery. But the point is that, can you imagine if they all were in their military, equipment, accoutered and with their, trained weapon in their hands? You wouldn't even have had that altercation. It would have been a moot point. So those are just some thoughts. Milo, does that kind of help to answer the question?
For me, yeah, I think it does. I don't know what this gentleman's feedback is necessarily on that yet. I've not received any further word from him, other than that he sent me one message that says that he feels like perhaps you should, place more emphasis on the state's constitutional and statutory provisions that relate to the militias, and perhaps rely a little less on the federal constitution. But I mean, there's applicability. I certainly understand that there are situations where the federal constitution is rightly applicable, and it does govern aspects of the state's militias. I think, I don't want to put words in his mouth, so I'm not really exactly sure what else to say other than that. He kind of wants a more state.
Well, let me explain why I use the federal wording. It is in the Constitution, and the U.S. Constitution is, according to Article 4, the supreme law of the land. So, therefore, I don't think that it's inappropriate to point to it. If you notice, I qualified it by saying when called into the actual service of the United States. The point is that the militia executes the laws of the state, okay, in its normal function. And the problem is, if I was to go and point to the state constitutions, there's 50 of them. And by the way, most of them don't even have provisions on state militia anymore. So we'd have to go back to the ones that were prior to 1861, before the Civil War, to even be able to articulate some of this stuff. What happened was they changed the wording. Remember when I mentioned the militia, the Dick Law put in place the organized militia of the state, territory, and District of Columbia? That is a term of art that has now become a substitute for the true term militia in the state constitutions. And what happened was, when the Dick Law was put in place, it was one step in the process. This is that continual, incrementalism. They knew that if they had gone full bore in the Dick Law, there would have been a revolt by the militiamen, because it was a 5-year period for the law to get changed. So what they did is they created the organized militia, which was the National Guard, or the Naval Militia. Okay, was another entity, and then the other term of art they used was the Reserve Militia. But Reserve Militia was a capital R, capital M. So what they did is they took all the men who were no longer going to be in the National Guard, which, by the way, the total number of people in the National Guard was 1/150th of the population of the state. One 1/500th. I'm sorry, 1/500th. So for every 500 men, one man was going to be contracted to become an officer or become a member of the National Guard. Okay. For instance, in the state of Florida today, we have about 7,000 National Guard troops in the entire state. Not a very big number. Okay. And that's pretty much the way it is across all the states. The National Guard, I lost my train of thought here. Let me get it back here. Oh, so they created this entity called the Reserve Militia, and they took all the men who would have been in the militia of the state that were not in the National Guard, and they just put them into this category, so that they were now reserved. They didn't have to do anything. They were happy, fat, dumb, and happy. They didn't have to go to musters anymore, and they could go and shoot tin cans off a fence post instead of going and mustering on a every month or every other month basis, and then have maybe a battalion muster and a regiment muster and a garrison muster some other time of the year. And so they were happy to not have to leave their farm and go do this stuff when they had chores that they had to do on a regular daily basis and so on. This is the early 1900s, or they'd have to leave work or whatever. But what happened was, in 1916, they went and changed a statute in the National Defense Act, sections 57, 58, and 60, and they changed that term of art from reserve militia to unorganized militia. And people kind of get that word confused. What it means is that you can't organize. So in other words, they took these men who were in reserve militia and eliminated them from militia itself and put them in this unorganized little m. They're now national troops. And then they turned around and created the selective service laws and deployed our boys to foreign wars and put conscription not under the states any longer, which is what it had been up until that time in every state, was state conscription to a militia company, to national conscription to a draft. And that, by the way, is the law to this day. If you are between the ages of 17 and 45, you are in the unorganized militia if you're not in the National Guard or you are not a retired Army, Navy, Marine, or Air Force personnel.
And if my understanding is correct, by labeling it the unorganized militia, which is now the vast majority of the population, then
yes,
they have literally made it statutorily a violation to organize.
Correct.
Wow. Wow.
And by the way, all of the states have conformed to the Dick Law and to the National Defense Act, so that the state laws all comply with the same general principles as the National Defense Act of 1916. And then there were several other acts put in place up until 1933. The National Guard troops take oaths to the U.S. Government and to the state government. And the U.S. government supersedes the state government. That Supreme Court has ruled that even if a governor objects to his National Guard being sent to a foreign country, even for deployment for training, the governor has no power to do so. There's all kinds of things.
So Governor Ellis could not, North Carolina's Governor Ellis could no longer write a letter to Lincoln saying, I will be no party to this wicked violation of the law.
Right, exactly.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
That's
because it's a federal law. The whole thing's all screwed up.
Well, we're going to be...
And I'm, just getting started. We could go on. And I don't want to overwhelm people. The problem is that there's just so many nuances to this thing.
That's why I keep going back and doing this subject over and over, because it's not something we talk about all the time, clearly. It's sad that there are people out there who can tell you the stats about certain sports, they're right down to the T, God knows how many years back, but they can't tell you spit about what's going on within our government. And yet you can know all the stats about the sports until the cows come home. It's not going to make any difference in your personal life. If you know about what's going on in the government, that's a different story. We are completely out of time, you guys. I want to thank you, and we'll do it again. I think that we need to stay on this for a while. I think that people need to be aware of what's going on. I think the more that we talk about it, the clearer it becomes for some people. And awareness is the number one thing, and that's really what I want right now. I want to bring awareness. If some people did this with as little as 15 people, and what I'm talking about is reestablishment of a state. I think it was 10 plus 5, 15 people got it accomplished. Certainly we can do it here in Florida, and that's going to be the next step, is to start asking those of you who are listening and live here in Florida. That's going to be one of our goals, is we want to put together a team where we can reestablish this state and become citizens of the state, and thereby retaining our benefits and being able to bring some sanity back to this thing, because right now they really are out of control. Anyway, let me give you guys an opportunity to say goodnight. David, let me go to you first. I'll give you an opportunity to say goodnight to Milo as well.
Yeah, just real quickly, I have a phrase I use quite a bit. At the beginning of a domain name, it says www. Well, think of that as "we will win."
There you go. I like that.
Yeah. That's my closing comment. And thank you, Riscalla, for the opportunity to be able to continue.
Oh, thank you, man. Thanks for the time. Greatly appreciate it. Going to do it again. This is important. I think really this is far more important than the charade that's going on right now with all this nonsense they're talking about, the impeachment and all this other stuff. Forget that. Whatever they're going to do is whatever they're going to do. We've got to find a way to make a better government. And this truly is. If we were doing what was intended for us to be done, we wouldn't be talking about this. We wouldn't be having this conversation. So I want to move on. I want to move forward. And there's so many things that we still need to touch on. Milo, give you the opportunity to say goodnight here before we run out of time.
Well, Riscalla, I appreciate you again having us on the show. I really enjoy these shows, and it's an honor to be here and be able to talk about this stuff. And thank you for your interest and your passion and the support that you've given to America's Remedy and the work that we've put into this. So thank you, and thanks to David, too, for everything that he brings to the table as well, because his information is a different angle on things, but I think it really is equally as valid and important.
Mm-hmm.
And together, I believe we all make a good team.
Yep.
So,
amen.
Thanks.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it, David. And Milo, wish you an awesome weekend, what's left of it. Once again, my sincere appreciation to you for your time tonight. And one thing that I truly love about other people is when they take time out of their life, because they can't get this back, you guys. This is time spent, and hopefully instead of using the word spent, it's time invested, that there are those of you who have now listened to what we have to say, what they had to say, and sparked that curiosity, and you want to know more. And we're going to be doing more about this because I really think this is vital. This is a true way for us to rectify something that has gone awry, a way for us to get back to something that would bring some normalcy back into our lives again. And maybe we can truly be free, because right now we aren't. We're still slaves. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Thanks to the L&M Radio Network for the platform. We'll be back in a week.
Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Take the red pill, take the blue pill, take the red pill, take the blue pill. You take the red pill, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back.